the fall of 1997, a boy walked out of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. He was barefoot. His skin was weathered dark from years of sun and wind. His hair hung past his shoulders in thick, matted clumps, and his fingernails had hardened into something much closer to claws. He did not speak. He did not make eye contact. And when Deputy Alan Royce of the Skamania County Sheriff's Office approached him on the shoulder of a logging road outside Carson, the boy dropped to all fours and growled. He was 14 years old, and nobody knew where he came from. The county placed him under emergency protective custody within hours. Standard procedure for an unaccompanied minor with no identification and no clear ability to communicate. But nothing about this case would stay standard for long, because the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate him, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Marian Haskell, with 17 years of experience in childhood trauma, conducted one 90-minute session with the boy. She submitted her formal resignation the following morning. In her brief written statement to the department, she included a single line that would circulate through local law enforcement for years. She wrote, "This child was not raised by humans." That sentence changed everything, because it forced people to ask a question that nobody in an official capacity wanted to touch. If this boy was not raised by humans, then who raised him? Or more accurately, what raised him? The Cascade Range stretches over 700 miles from Northern California through Oregon and Washington, all the way into British Columbia. It contains some of the most remote and densely forested wilderness left in North America. Entire valleys sit untouched by roads, trails, or any form of human infrastructure. The terrain is volcanic, steep, and covered in old-growth timber so thick that satellite imaging struggles to penetrate the canopy. It is also the single most active region for Sasquatch sighting reports in the entire world. That is not an exaggeration. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the largest database of documented sighting reports in North America, lists more Class A encounters in the Cascade Corridor than in any other zone on the continent. Class A means the witness observed the creature clearly, in good conditions, with no reasonable alternative explanation. We are talking about hundreds of reports spanning decades. Hunters, hikers, for forestry workers, people with no interest in cryptozoology and no motivation to fabricate stories. And they all describe the same thing. A massive bipedal figure covered in dark hair, standing between 7 and 9 feet tall, moving through the forest with speed and silence that should not be possible for something that size. The boy who walked out of those mountains in 1997 did not match any missing persons report in the state of Washington. He did not match any report in Oregon, Idaho, Montana, or British Columbia. The FBI's National Crime Information Center ran his fingerprints and got nothing. His dental records matched no known file. This child did not exist before the moment he appeared on that logging road. Deputy Royce later described the encounter in a recorded interview with a regional newspaper. He said the boy moved in a way that unsettled him on a deep level, not erratic, not panicked, controlled, deliberate. The boy crouched low and scanned the environment constantly, the way an animal surveys for threats. When Royce tried to offer him a bottle of water, the boy smelled it first. Not a quick sniff. A prolonged, deep inhalation with his nose almost touching the cap. Then he bit through the plastic rather than unscrewing it. At the hospital in Stevenson, physicians conducted a full examination. The results were not what anyone expected. The boy's muscle density was abnormal for his age. His skeletal development showed signs of extreme physical stress, consistent with years of climbing, running, and sleeping on hard surfaces. His feet were calloused to a degree that one attending physician compared to rawhide. There were scars across his back and arms, but they did not appear to be from abuse. The pattern suggested repeated contact with branches, rocks, and rough terrain. He had never received a vaccination. He had never seen a dentist, but his teeth, while worn, showed no cavities whatsoever. His diet, whatever it had been, contained almost no processed sugar. The most striking detail from the medical report was something that did not get public attention until years later. The boy's body carried a distinct and persistent odor that the medical staff could not identify. It was not the smell of poor hygiene. Several nurses described it independently as musky, dense, and animal-like. One compared it to wet elk hide. Another said it reminded her of something she had once smelled while hiking near a known wildlife corridor in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. She could not place it at the time, but she remembered it when the news coverage started. Dr. Marian Haskell was brought in 2 days after the boy's arrival at the hospital. She was a respected clinician. She had worked with nonverbal children, with feral child cases referenced in academic literature, and with victims of severe isolation. She was not someone who rattled easily, but her session with the boy lasted exactly 90 minutes before she stood up, left the room, and drove home without speaking to anyone on staff. The details of that session remain sealed under patient confidentiality, but fragments have surfaced over the years through second-hand accounts from hospital employees and law enforcement personnel involved in the case. What those fragments suggest is deeply unsettling. According to one source who was present in the observation room adjacent to the session, Dr. Haskell attempted standard nonverbal communication protocols with the boy for the first 30 minutes. She used picture cards, gesture-based prompts, and object recognition exercises. The boy ignored all of them. He sat on the floor rather than the chair and rocked slowly, not in a distressed manner, but rhythmically, as if mimicking something. His eyes tracked Dr. Haskell's movements with an intensity that one observer described as predatory. At approximately the 40-minute mark, something changed. Haskell placed a small audio recorder on the table and played a series of nature sounds. Birds, water, wind. The boy showed no reaction. Then she played a recording of a known Sasquatch vocalization, a segment from the Sierra Sounds, audio recordings captured in the Sierra Nevada in the early 1970s that remain among the most analyzed pieces of Bigfoot evidence in existence. The boy reacted immediately. He stopped rocking. He lifted his head. And according to the observer, he responded, not with words, with a sound. A low, guttural vocalization that started in his chest and rose into something between a howl and a moan. It was not a scream. It was not random noise. The observer said it had structure, rhythm, almost like a reply. Dr. Haskell sat perfectly still for several seconds. Then she played the recording again, and the boy responded again, this time louder and longer, with a variation in pitch that suggested he was not simply mimicking. He was communicating. The session continued for another 50 minutes. By the end of it, Dr. Haskell had stopped using her prepared materials entirely. She sat on the floor across from the boy, playing segments of the Sierra Sounds on a loop, while the boy responded with increasing complexity. At one point, the boy stood up and moved to the window. He pressed his hands flat against the glass and stared toward the tree line east of the hospital, in the direction of the mountains. Then he produced a sound that everyone in the observation room heard clearly. It was loud, resonant, and came from deep in his diaphragm. One of the nurses later said it vibrated the glass. That was the last moment of the session. So Haskell turned off her recorder, collected her materials, and left without completing her evaluation forms. She submitted her resignation the next morning. When contacted weeks later by a journalist from the Columbia newspaper in Vancouver, Washington, she declined to comment on the case. The only additional statement she ever made was to a colleague, who later repeated it in a podcast interview. Dr. Haskell reportedly said, "I have spent my career understanding how children develop in the absence of normal human contact. That boy did not develop in the absence of contact. He developed in the presence of something else. That phrase, something else, is what separates this case from every other feral child account in modern history. Because feral children are not new, there are documented cases going back centuries on children raised by dogs in Ukraine, a girl who lived among monkeys in Uganda, a boy discovered in a German town square in 1828 who had apparently spent years locked in a dark cell. These cases are tragic, but they are explainable. Neglect, abuse, abandonment. The mechanisms are human, even when the outcomes look inhuman. But the boy from the Cascades did not fit those categories. He was not malnourished or physically neglected. His body showed signs of being remarkably well sustained. His caloric intake had been sufficient for years. His bones were dense. He had survived harsh mountain winters at elevation, without shelter, without fire, and without clothing beyond a crude wrap made from animal hide that had mostly disintegrated when he was found. Someone, or something, had kept this child alive in one of the most unforgiving landscapes in North America. And whatever that something was, the boy recognized its voice on a tape recorder in a psychiatric evaluation room in rural Washington. The Cascade Mountains were not done giving up secrets, because the boy was only the beginning. Within weeks of the boy's discovery, a team from the Skamania County Search and Rescue Division conducted a backcountry sweep of the area where he had been found. Their objective was straightforward: find evidence of where the boy had been living, a shelter, a camp, anything that could explain how a child survived alone in the Cascades for what physicians estimated was at least 8 to 10 years. What they found instead raised more questions than it answered. 3 miles east of the logging road, for in a drainage basin thick with Douglas fir and western red cedar, the team located a series of impressions in a muddy creek bank. They were footprints, but they were not the boy's. The prints measured 17 inches in length and 7 inches across the ball of the foot. The stride between them was over 4 feet. A forensic analyst brought in from Portland cast 2 of the clearest impressions in plaster and noted dermal ridges across the sole, a detail that is almost impossible to fabricate. Dermal ridges are the equivalent of fingerprints on the bottom of a foot. Humans have them. Great apes have them. And whatever left those prints in the mud had them too. This was not the first time footprint casts from the Cascade region had shown dermal ridge detail. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University, has cataloged over 300 footprint casts from across the Pacific Northwest. Many of them display consistent anatomical features, including a mid-tarsal break, which is a flexibility in the midfoot that humans lost through evolution, but that remains present in great apes. Meldrum has argued for decades that the consistency of these features across casts collected by different people in different locations over different decades points to a real biological species rather than an elaborate series of hoaxes. The prints found near the boy's recovery site matched this pattern exactly, but the footprints were only part of what the search team discovered. Roughly 200 yards uphill from the creek bank, they found a depression beneath a rock overhang that appeared to have been used as a sleeping site. The ground was packed flat. Tufts of coarse, dark hair were embedded in the soil and caught on the rough edges of the rock above. Samples were collected and sent to a lab in Seattle for analysis. The results came back inconclusive, but notable. The hair was not human. It was not bear, elk, deer, cougar, or any other species in the regional wildlife database. The lab classified it as belonging to an unknown primate. When the results were shared with the search team, one veteran tracker named Dale Emerson, who had spent 30 years working in the Cascades, said he was not surprised. He had found similar hair samples on 3 previous occasions during routine trail maintenance, each time near Remote Creek, beds above 4,000 feet in elevation. He had never reported them because he did not think anyone would take him seriously. That classification, unknown primate, appears more often in Bigfoot research than the public realizes. Hair samples collected from suspected Sasquatch encounter sites across North America have been analyzed by multiple independent laboratories over the past 50 years. While many turn out to be bear or other known species, a recurring subset defies identification. These samples share characteristics with primate hair, including medullary structure and cuticle pattern, but do not match any cataloged primate species. They exist in a taxonomic gap that science has yet to fill. The vocalization evidence is equally compelling. In the decades since the Sierra sounds were first recorded by Al Berry and Ron Moorhead in the early 1970s, audio analysis technology has advanced dramatically. Modern spectrographic analysis of those recordings, conducted by researchers at the University of Wyoming, has confirmed that the vocalizations were produced by a living larynx. They were not mechanical. They were not digitally synthesized. And the vocal range demonstrated in the recordings exceeds the physical capability of any known human speaker. The fundamental frequency drops below what the human vocal tract can produce, while the upper harmonics reach ranges typically associated with much larger resonating chambers than a human chest cavity can provide. The boy from the Cascades produced sounds that, according to the observer present during Dr. Haskell's session, bore striking similarities to segments of the Sierra sounds. This was never formally documented because Haskell resigned before completing her report. But the observer, a psychiatric nurse named Linda Caldwell, later provided a detailed account to a Bigfoot research organization. She described the boy's vocalizations as structured, responsive, and emotionally varied. She said it was not babbling. It was not random. It sounded like language. Thermal imaging and trail camera technology have added another layer to the evidence base in recent years. In 2015, a thermal camera mounted on a wildlife survey drone in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest captured footage of a large bipedal heat signature moving through a clearing at approximately 3 in the morning. The figure moved upright, at a pace estimated between 15 and 20 miles per hour, and disappeared into a tree line within seconds. The thermal profile showed a body temperature consistent with a large mammal, and the proportions did not match any known species in the region. Bears, even when standing briefly on hind legs, do not sustain bipedal locomotion at that speed over that distance. Trail cameras have produced similar anomalies. A 2019 compilation by the Olympic Project, a field research organization operating in the Olympic Peninsula and southern Cascades, documented over 40 trail camera images showing unexplained shapes, shadows, and partial figures that could not be attributed to known wildlife. Several of these images were captured within a 20-mile radius of the location where the boy was found in 1997. While none of these images provide definitive proof on their own, the sheer volume of anomalies concentrated in the same geographic region tells its own story. Something large, something bipedal, and something deeply wary of human detection has been moving through these forests for a very long time. The Cascade Corridor is not alone in producing this kind of evidence. The global cryptid sighting database, maintained by researchers affiliated with the International Cryptozoology Society, includes reports from every inhabited continent. The Yowie in Australia, the Yeren in China's Hubei province, the Almas in Mongolia and Central Asia, the Orang Pendek in the rainforests of Sumatra. Each of these traditions describes a large, bipedal, hair-covered creature living in remote wilderness. The physical descriptions vary in size and coloring, but the behavioral patterns are remarkably consistent. Nocturnal activity, extreme avoidance of human contact, habitation in dense, inaccessible terrain, vocalizations that carry over long distances. What makes the North American evidence unique is its density and documentation. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization alone hosts over 5,000 sighting reports in its public database, each one vetted by regional investigators. The highest concentration of Class A sightings falls along the Cascade Range, from Northern California through Central Washington. This is not coincidence. This is habitat. Old-growth forest, abundant water, large prey populations, and vast stretches of land that no human being has set foot in for decades, if ever. Research expeditions into these areas have intensified in the past 10 years. The Olympic Project conducts annual field operations using thermal drones, parabolic microphones, environmental DNA sampling, and motion-triggered camera arrays. In 2021, they collected water samples from a remote creek in the southern Cascades that returned traces of primate DNA not matching any species in the GenBank database. The results were presented at a private symposium and are currently under peer review. If confirmed, it would represent the first genetic evidence of an unclassified primate species in North America. The boy who walked out of the mountains never spoke a word of any human language. He was placed in a series of foster care facilities over the following years, each placement ending when caregivers reported behaviors they could not manage or understand. He avoided beds and preferring to sleep on the floor or beneath furniture. He hoarded food instinctively, hiding portions in corners and behind objects. He responded to loud noises, not with fear, but with aggression, dropping low and baring his teeth. And on multiple occasions, caregivers reported hearing him vocalize at night. Long, low sounds directed toward windows facing east, toward the mountains. His case file was eventually sealed. His identity was protected under state law. But the questions he left behind have never gone away, because the physical evidence keeps accumulating. The footprint casts keep showing dermal ridges. The thermal cameras keep catching heat signatures that do not belong to any cataloged animal. The vocalizations keep registering on spectrographs with frequencies that human beings cannot produce. And the Cascade Mountains keep standing there, vast and dark, and full of things we have not yet found. Dr. Haskell never returned to clinical practice. She moved to New Mexico and declined every interview request for the rest of her career. But the single line from her resignation letter has become one of the most cited statements in the history of Bigfoot research. This child was not raised by humans. She never clarified what she believed raised him. She never had to, because everyone who read that sentence already knew what she meant, and the mountains, as always, kept their silence.